Hey Jessica, thanks for joining today to the next series of Sips and Software. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit different, startups and maybe why they succeed and why they fail. So Jessica brings 2 decades of experience with this topic alone. She has a strong philosophy of the 3 Ps that she'll touch on in just a second here with her introduction. And I think that the community is going to gain a lot of insight from today's meeting. Unfortunately, I left Chicago about 2 years ago. Otherwise, we'd be doing this interview in person. So, Jessica, thanks again for joining today. I'll let you briefly introduce yourself more and jump right into the 3 Ps.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Colin, and thanks ever so much for having me. Definitely would have been good to meet in person in Chicago. Weather's finally getting nice and warm here, so maybe another time. Um, Great to be on your podcast. Really excited to see your podcast coming to life over the last couple of months. Great initiative,
Yeah,
and
appreciate that.
really happy to be here. So yes, as you said, I've been in the SaaS industry in tech startups and scale ups for the last couple of decades, primarily in the procure and fintech areas. And I've really been focusing on operational and product marketing elements in terms of helping organizations scale on both sides of the pond, as you might be able to tell from my accent.
Huh, just a little bit. So no, that's great. I know that you talk about a big foundation for growth is your 3 Ps, people, process, and positioning. And I know you feel it's critical. I've seen startups not nail those, so I know it's a little critical. Can you kind of touch on what that means to you and how you've made that a foundation for your success and positioning other startups that have success?
Yes, absolutely. I think over the years, I think if I've noticed one common theme, it's a lot of organizations get funding, they get super excited, and then oftentimes they're trying to run before they can walk, and they tend to forget about a little bit of the fundamental elements and the foundational pieces that need to be put in place first to actually be able to scale properly. And I categorize those, as you mentioned, into 3 Ps, which is the people, process, and positioning. So people, making sure you have the right talent in the right roles to be able to execute and scale properly, and process, being able to have teams work efficiently and effectively together. And then positioning, that's where the product marketing comes in, and really making sure that you're taking your products to market and being able to clearly articulate the value proposition of those products and how they would add value to your customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And
without the 3 Ps, sorry,
go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead.
and without the 3 Ps, it's really been documented over the years that organizations then tend to not be very successful and end up failing. And as a matter of fact, 90% of tech startups do end up failing. And I think a big reason for that is that they like to grow quite quickly, and they forget to focus on these foundational elements first.
So would you say that's kind of the biggest mistake that these startups are making is skipping the foundation? Because I've seen go-to-market strategy be a huge challenge. You have a good idea, you validated it as a small thing, and I know you have some experience shaping up approaches to scaling. Can you touch on both of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yes, in my opinion, it is probably the largest area that contributes to some of the failure rates. And I think it's just sort of this rapid expansion, growth at all costs. Let's be super agile. And I think oftentimes agility is mistaken for, okay, we don't need any processes, that's going to hold us back. Or, we're just going to have this terminology of like, well, if you're joining a
Hmm.
startup, you're going to wear a boatload of hats, and you're just going to take whatever's thrown at you. And the analogy of, well, if we build it, they'll come. We know our product's good, we know there's a need for it, so we don't need to overthink it too much. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that is made. And I think a lot of those failures can probably be prevented if some of those areas are focused on early on and throughout. Actually, I'm not just seeing it with startups, but also with scale-up organizations as well, because it's a an ongoing element of having to pivot and adjust. And so if you don't have those things in place, then it's going to be really tough to pivot and move quickly.
There's no doubt about that. We're seeing that today in the economic uncertainties with everything going on in today's world. We're seeing some companies struggle with that and how they're going to position in the new world as they have to manufacture differently and so on and so forth. So I just want to dive into your piece. So the first one being people. People is something that I hold close, near and dear to my heart. Everything I do in today's world focuses on people first. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the industrial software space, and you hear a lot of buzz about AI. I want to elevate people, not replace people personally. But in the tech scale up, I think you touched on something very important. There's this concept of you can run in, be agile, be aggressive, wear a bunch of hats, but if it's not the right people and you don't have the right personalities and the mesh of culture in place, I could see scaling up being a true struggle, or people are being set up for false expectations. So, what advice would you give a tech scale up that wants to not only retain talent but also keep and grow talent?
That's a really good one. And there's a reason I put the people as the first P. Because not only do I fundamentally agree with you is the most important piece, but it's also probably the most difficult piece for organizations to get right. And I've seen it done extremely well. But more often than not, I've actually seen it done not very well. And then that is to the detriment of the organization. And I think what it comes down to is a few aspects. Having the right people in the right roles, matching their skills, playing into their strengths, right? Matching their skills to the needs of the business, but also enabling those people to grow with the business. Building up loyalty and engagement from your team where they really feel, even if it's not a startup, if it's already in a scale up phase, there are ways to make people feel that they are an instrumental part to the organization, and they almost feel like a co-founder if you do it right, if the culture is right, if the people are treated correctly. I think I'm a big believer in having regular stand-ups. For example, I've the organizations where I've been, where it's been most successful is there's a weekly all hands meeting, getting everybody together, getting everybody on the same page, and there's an energy element to it as well, and sort of building that energy and excitement with everyone. And there's very few organizations, I think, that can do that well. I've been lucky enough to be in a couple of them. When I started actually with my very first startup, Trading Partners, they really focused on the people culture. And I think there's a very big difference between having a bunch of values on your website and
Hmm.
claiming to have really good company culture, which pretty much every single tech company does,
Yeah.
versus unlimited vacation, 4-day work week, go have snacks in the kitchen. That's very different from truly building a really strong culture that can actually help drive the growth and have these have everybody be part of that growth.
Sometimes what I've seen in the scale phase with this culture is maybe a company starts with good culture, but the investors kind of put a lot of pressure for
Mhm.
accelerated growth. And maybe, I'm not saying this is always the case. Sometimes the investors don't really understand the industry they're investing in. Have you seen or helped people push back on some of those expectations so that leadership can maintain and balance flexibility with structure as they scale and add more people?
Yeah, and I do, like you, I have seen it from some aspects from the investors, but actually, I think where I've seen the biggest mistakes happen is oftentimes, and like you said, you might start with a really strong culture, right? The founders, have this core belief. They've got a way of working. The first few people they hire, they make sure that culture doesn't get diluted. But what ends up happening oftentimes is that actually there might be some wrong hires brought into other leadership
Mm,
positions. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I've seen, where leadership hires are made quite hastily sometimes. Again, this sort of rapid trying to grow really quickly, and sometimes not doing due diligence or really making sure that culture doesn't get diluted. And then therefore you have people sometimes in leadership positions or maybe even throughout the organization that are fundamentally then changing that culture, unfortunately.
Yeah, I didn't even put two and two together. It makes total sense because if you hire somebody, for example, the lead sales that came from a very robust, systematic sales process, and you're trying to get now into an organization that's growing fast and still figuring out its process, those two worlds colliding, I can see causing a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Which kind of ties us in a way to your next P, which is process. So I know agility is a big buzzword for startups, and it doesn't matter the industry. Agile is always the thing. Let's take advantage by being the first to the punch, and then learn how to put our hands up later, kind of thing.
Right.
So that comes with risk. I think the punch can sting a lot more than expected, especially if you have a solution and you're releasing it too early. So how do you coach against process, and how does that come into place in your world?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think oftentimes trying to coach startup or even scale up leadership into, look, process is really necessary. It might be a necessary evil depending on how you see it. But it's quite counterintuitive, right? Because they're like, well, it's going to hold us back. It's going to slow things
Hmm.
down because then you have to put all these workflows together, and then all of these process documents and everything else. But when you think about it, actually, you waste more time and you duplicate efforts when you don't have processes. So this whole thing about we have to be agile, we have to move quickly, we can't afford to spend time on processes. Actually, by not spending time on processes, especially as you grow and add different functions into your organization, that's just going to trip you up. It's going to waste more time, and it's going to make so that your teams, your functions are misaligned. And you can't scale if your functions are misaligned. You can't scale properly, especially in a tech organization, when you have completely siloed teams and completely siloed processes. So aligning those processes, especially cross-functional elements, and I think that's where sort of the product marketing and other roles fit in, where like we really are there to help bridge the gap between product and sales, and making sure things are flowing properly and there's a go-to-market process and everything else, bridging things between engineering, product, sales, and marketing, and other areas of the organization. And if you don't have that, your growth is not only going to stall, but you're also going to frustrate your customers, right? If you don't have a proper go-to-market process in terms of releasing new features, and you don't communicate it properly to your customers, and there's not a process in which you document all of that, your customers are going to get really frustrated. And that's probably the least of your worries. I mean, the worst part is they probably won't understand what you're delivering to them. They won't understand the value, and therefore your adoptions, so it sort of has a knock-on effect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a key point that you just mentioned, understanding value, because we often, no matter what world we're in, if it's a startup or a scale up or anything, when we're positioning a solution or working, we perceive value as the person trying to sell it or position it, but sometimes the customers might not see it the same way. So thinking about that outcome and thinking about the value that's customer centric, I think that's a huge part, and that ties now into positioning. So
Yeah.
whether it's a scale up or a startup, positioning is key. We've talked a lot about startups today. I want to kind of tie in, as I talked about, the market's a little crazy right now. So for a scale up to stand out in today's crowded market, especially tech, and in the world, fintech, how can they position themselves to stand out? That's a pretty crowded space, and it sounds like you have some serious experience guiding there.
It's a pretty crowded space, and but at the same time, things are shifting. I think the number one thing is you can't rest on your laurels. And I think what organizations tend to do is, okay, we've pretty much got our messaging mapped out. We believe that we're sort of hitting on our customers' biggest pain points and being able to solve for those and provide value and really answer the question of the so what, right? I think there's the
Hmm.
ongoing question of, well, how does this help me in my day to day? Just put it in pure English for me. I don't want technical jargon and I don't want marketing fluff, because those are sort of the two ends of the spectrum, right? I just want, for me, in my role every day, how is this going to help me succeed? That's all. Sounds pretty simple, right? But it's
Yeah,
not.
but it's
And
not that simple. Yeah.
things are constantly pivoting. So I think one key thing, and where we succeeded at Cooper in particular, and we ended up having a super successful IPO, was we spent a lot of time listening. We don't make assumptions. You can't make assumptions. You can't rest on your laurels thinking you've nailed your messaging, you've nailed your positioning, that's it, it's good for the next 10 years. And you just keep repeating the listening, whether it's listening to your customers, having customer advisory boards, whether it's listening to market analysts. I think analyst relations and spending time with market analysts is still oftentimes hugely underrated. And I think it's really important to be able to then nail your messaging and your positioning correctly.
Yeah, you snuck it in there with Coupa. I mean, you've seen this work in action and the three Ps come to life. I mean, I think we should highlight that further. Record-breaking IPO, it's kind of a big deal. Can you talk a little bit about how the three Ps played in that success and how that's churned into other results?
Yeah. A few things. In my mind, when I look across my career, and not just because they had a really successful IPO, but fundamentally, when I look at ticking all those three P boxes, they certainly did that. And I think it starts with leadership. Rob Bernstein was able to create this really engaging culture, but it was almost, you know, it was just really this high energy, right? And it was,
Mhm.
everybody was singing from the same hymn sheet. We would have a saying, all of us are stronger than one of us, right? Or it's
Absolutely.
basically about everybody being on the same page, everybody swimming in the same direction, everybody singing from the same hymn sheet. So and that sort of plays into the people and the culture piece that we were talking about earlier, making sure you have the right people in the right roles, making sure that everybody's working together. So that cross-functional workflow and those processes became really key. And then really the positioning, that I think that to me was a masterclass in how to not only be able to get a hold of and position yourself as a leader in the market, but still to this day. I mean, I was there between 2016 and 2018, and here we are today, and they are still the market leader,
Yeah.
business spend management. And they've just done this, I think, better than anyone that I've seen, where they've invested a lot of time and resources, and not even just specific teams, but the whole entire organization into these listening exercises, staying close to their customers, staying close to the analysts, constantly just slightly pivoting. We would have master classes with sales in terms of, okay, XYZ competitor just did this. This is how you now need to sort of adjust your pitch in these competitive situations. And it was literally really fine tuning all these little elements.
Yeah, and I think that's very fruitful for someone to hear to avoid being part of that 90%. So I think the insight's been incredible today. I think anybody that's in the startup or scale up journey is going to learn from this experience, and I really appreciate your time. Are there any last parting words of guidance that you want to give the community?
Um, no, I think just make sure you do focus on those three P's. You can't run a business without them,
Yeah,
and there's no magic wand where you can just very quickly accelerate and be the next Amazon, for
yeah,
example.
no doubt.
Right? The time and effort has to go into these three areas, and people is the first one on the list for a reason. Without the right people, you don't have a team that can grow and nurture your customers. And it's always sort of customer led, customer first, but without your people being able to nurture those customers, you won't have any customers and you won't have a business.
Yeah,
So I
no,
think, that would probably be my advice. And I think just having the people be part of your growth, be part of that journey with you, and you will have some very loyal individuals that will be on that journey for a very, very long time with you to help make it a success.